My name is Marielle Vaughn, 58 years old, a retired art teacher who still smells of turpentine and rain-warped canvases. I used to believe color could explain everything, how love fades, how time bruises. But nothing I ever painted could capture the way a heart monitor sounds when it begins to slow. The hospital room in Santa Fe was soaked in that sound the night Ronan slipped away. He had been a strong man once, broad-shouldered from years of engineering fieldwork. Yet when the last attack came, his voice was thin as a reed in wind. His hand clutched mine, the bones sharp under paper skin. "Promise me," he whispered. "Promise you'll never go back to the ranch in Arroyo Sombra." The words startled me more than the fear in his eyes. We hadn't spoken of that place in over 20 years. It had belonged to his family, once a dry, wind-scoured parcel somewhere south of town. I wanted to ask why, to demand some explanation. But the nurse was already calling the code. Ronan's fingers slipped from mine before the question could leave my mouth. The funeral came 3 days later. Bright sun on red earth. As if the desert refused to mourn, Ava couldn't come. Her graduate research in Colorado kept her away, though she called to say she loved her father and would light a candle by the river. People from the university spoke kindly about Ronan's precision and calm, but none of them knew he had carried fear in his chest, along with the failing heart. When everyone left, the house turned cavernous. His tools still hung in the garage, labeled and polished. A quiet army waiting for commands that would never come. I made tea, sat by the window, and listened to the wind pressing against the adobe walls. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay the ranch he had forbidden me to see. I told myself promises were sacred, that love meant obedience even when the words made no sense. But as the days thickened into silence and the scent of him faded from our sheets, the question he left behind refused to rest. 2 months later, the phone rang his lawyer, Ada Martell, asking me to come by her office. She said there was something Ronan wanted me to have. 2 months after the funeral, winter still clung to Santa Fe like a held breath. I drove downtown under a pale sky, the streets lined with dormant cottonwoods, their branches like old veins against the light. The law office of Ada Martell occupied a narrow adobe building on Canyon Road. Its wooden door painted the color of rust. Ada had been Ronan's attorney for years, though I'd met her only twice at university banquets. She greeted me with a careful warmth, professional sympathy, edged with curiosity. "Mrs. Vaughn," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "Ronan left something for you, to be delivered after the estate filing, from a drawer." She drew a small wooden box and an envelope thick with dust. Inside the box lay a brass key, heavy and pitted, its head carved with a faint leaf design. I ran my thumb across the metal. It was cold, unfamiliar, almost defiant. Ada handed me the envelope next. My name, Marielle, flowed across it in Ronan's handwriting. Steady, deliberate, like his blueprints. I opened it carefully. "My dearest, if you're reading this, I've gone sooner than I hoped. Forgive me for the silences I left between us. The ranch in Arroyo Sombra is yours now. Look for what I could not fix. It will make sense when you see it with your own eyes." My throat tightened. The ranch, his forbidden place. Ada explained that Ronan had quietly reacquired a small parcel of his family's old land 5 years ago. "He left explicit instructions that you were to learn of it only after his passing," she said. Her tone held no judgment. But I heard it anyway. I asked about the property value. Ada hesitated, then admitted that the land's worth had tripled due to a planned solar farm expansion nearby. A company called Sierra Hydro had been buying adjacent plots for months. I sat back, dizzy. Ronan had never spoken of investments or hidden money. We lived comfortably, but modestly. Now a locked ranch, a cryptic letter, and a key heavy enough to anchor a secret rested on my lap. When I left Ada's office, the air outside had warmed slightly. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves, each drop sounding like a clock resetting itself. I slipped the key into my coat pocket and felt its weight against my palm as if it were calling me somewhere I had already promised never to go. The next morning, I left Santa Fe before dawn, the brass key tucked inside the glove compartment like a forbidden relic. The highway stretched eastward, a ribbon of gray through the desert. Beyond the windshield, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains glowed faintly, the last blush of snow melting down their ridges. The air smelled of sage and cold dust, a scent that made me think of Ronan's shirts after a long day working outdoors. 2 hours later, I turned onto a narrower road flanked by piñon and juniper. The land rolled out in low, rust-colored hills, each one quiet and watchful. The sign read, Arroyo Sombra, Shadow Creek. I slowed the car and stopped at a small roadside cafe, its windows clouded with steam. Inside, a handful of locals nursed coffee mugs and stared at a muted weather report. When I asked for directions to the old Ellery Ranch, conversation stopped mid-sentence. The waitress, a woman with silver hair pulled into a braid, wiped her hands on her apron. Ellery, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. That land hasn't seen a family supper since the 90s. Did you know my husband, Ronan Vaughn? Her eyes flickered with something recognition or pity. I couldn't tell. He came through once, not long before. She trailed off and shook her head. Road's washed in parts, but you'll find it. Just follow the old fence line. The sky was bruising purple when I reached the gate. A weathered sign leaned against a post, E.R. Vaughn Private Property. The metal latch bore his initials, R.E.V., carved deep. A new padlock gleamed against the rusted chain. The storm had begun to gather behind me, clouds low and heavy. I fitted the brass key into the lock, half expecting it not to turn, but it did smoothly, almost gratefully. The hinge groaned as I pushed the gate open. Rain began to fall in thin, silver threads, carrying the smell of iron and wet earth. I drove through slowly, the road ahead vanishing into a curtain of dust and stormlight. The wind had nearly died by the time I reached the main barn. The building stood apart from the house, its tin roof mottled with rust, the wooden siding sun-bleached to silver. I expected the familiar smell of hay or oil when I pulled the latch, but instead, a dry, sterile air drifted out sharp with dust and old paper. The space inside was nothing like a rancher's workshop. Drafting tables lined the walls, their surfaces covered in maps, diagrams, and rolls of tracing paper. Labeled boxes stacked neatly to the ceiling bore the same printed mark, Ellery Hydrology Survey, 2003-2020. I brushed my fingers across one and left streaks on the dust. Half afraid I was touching a life Ronan had lived entirely without me. Across the far wall hung photographs, dozens of them. Each frame captured some part of the desert, cracked and thirsting. Arroyos split open like veins. Dry wells yawning where water should have been, beneath every image. Ronan's precise handwriting marked the year and coordinates. The pattern of his mind was there, order, purpose, and something like guilt. A low hum startled me. On a corner table, a small video monitor blinked to life. Static filled the barn, then steadied into Ronan's face, tired but intent. "If you're watching, Mariel," he said, his voice thick with the echo of dust. "It means I couldn't finish this fight." My knees weakened. I gripped the table's edge. "You'll find records of what we proved, the diversions, the falsified permits. The companies buying land for renewable energy aren't after sunlight. They're after groundwater. Declan helped them cover it up. He thinks it's progress. I call it theft." He paused, drawing a slow breath that trembled. Keep this safe, even if you don't understand it yet. The truth is heavier than the key I gave you. The screen flickered once, then went black, leaving only my reflection in the glass, haunted, older somehow. The desert outside was silent. I stood among his papers, surrounded by a world he had built in secrecy, and felt the first edge of grief sharpen into something colder. By late afternoon, the storm had cleared, leaving the sky brittle and pale. I was sorting through Ronan's files, trying to make sense of the data tables and survey notes, when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the stillness. Through the barn window, a black SUV came into view, its headlights cutting across the open yard. 3 men stepped out. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably familiar. Declan Vaughn, Ronan's older brother. I hadn't seen him since our wedding. Age had made his face harder, his confidence more polished. He carried himself like someone who believed the world still belonged to him. Marielle, he greeted, using a tone that sounded almost gentle. We were just passing through and thought we should check on the property. You must be overwhelmed. I stood at the barn door, keeping the threshold between us. It's not yours to check on, Declan. Ronan left everything in order. He exchanged a look with one of the younger men, both dressed too neatly for the dust. You might not know, he said smoothly, but this ranch is part of a pending sale to Sierra Hydro Projects. It's all perfectly legal. You'll be compensated handsomely once the transfer finalizes. My stomach tightened. There's no sale, I said, too quickly. His smile didn't falter. Well, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I'd be happy to send the papers. His eyes drifted past me toward the interior of the barn, to the stacks of boxes and maps. Ronan had good intentions, but poor timing. We can help you manage what's left. I stepped inside and closed the door firmly. From the window, I watched them linger, speaking in low tones before leaving. When dusk fell, I went outside and saw fresh tire marks looping near the gate. A faint mechanical hum came from above a small drone, its red light blinking as it hovered, then vanished into the dark horizon. Back in the house, the phone rang. Ava's voice came through, bright and unguarded. Mom, Uncle Declan emailed me about an investment opportunity tied to Dad's land. He says it could help you. Should I reply? I gripped the receiver until my knuckles ached, staring out at the empty road where the taillights had disappeared. The next morning, I found a note wedged beneath the barn door-lined paper, written in an uneven hand. Mrs. Vaughn, if you're still at the ranch, please wait for me. Celia Hart. The name stirred something faint. Ronan had mentioned her years ago, the caretaker who'd tended his parents' property before it fell into ruin. She arrived before noon in a dented green truck. A woman in her 70s, with sun-leathered skin and eyes the color of sage leaves. He told me you might come one day, she said quietly, glancing toward the barn. Said I should help you find what he couldn't carry alone. We walked to the back of the feed room, where the floorboards had warped from years of dry heat. Celia knelt with surprising strength and pried up 2 planks, revealing a recessed handle of rusted iron. He built this after the drought of 2012, she murmured. Said the truth needed a cooler place to survive. The trapdoor groaned as we lifted it. A narrow stairwell descended into dimness, air cool and metallic. Celia switched on a hanging bulb. Beneath us lay a small, climate-controlled archive, no larger than a cellar, lined with filing cabinets, sealed cases, and hard drives labeled with Ronan's meticulous handwriting. I opened one binder. Charts of groundwater decline stretched across the pages, decades of data, annotated in red. Another folder contained copies of permits, signatures duplicated with obvious precision. And there, among the files, a typed report titled Sierra Hydro Cooling Operations, Unlawful diversions, 2016. He knew, Celia said. They pumped from aquifers meant for the small farms east of here. Declan's company handled the paperwork. Ronan tried to stop it, but when his heart failed, he told me to seal everything until you came. I turned another page affidavits from local farmers, notarized but never filed. Each testified to wells gone dry after the pipeline installation. My pulse quickened, a heat spreading through the chill air. He didn't want to endanger you, Celia continued. He thought if he held the proof long enough, the right time would come. I closed the folder carefully, the paper trembling in my hands. Above us, the wind moved through the barn boards like a restless sigh. For the first time since Ronan's death, I felt not confusion, but direction. Thin, steady, and undeniable, like water, finding its way through stone. Eva arrived 3 days later, the desert dust still on her jacket, her expression sharper than I remembered. She barely hugged me before setting her backpack down by the door. Uncle Declan called. She said, skipping the greetings. He told me you're refusing to sign off on Dad's land deal. Mom, he says you don't understand what this project could mean for renewable energy. Her words carried the impatience of youth and the conviction of someone who still believed every cause could be pure. I tried to steady my voice. It's not about energy, Ava. It's about water, our water, and the people who depend on it. Declan's company isn't saving the desert. They're draining it. She frowned, folding her arms. You think Dad didn't know that he worked with them for years. Maybe you're just seeing ghosts because you miss him. The accusation cut deeper than she intended. I opened the file Ronan had labeled hydro diversion data and showed her the maps, the forgeries, the signed affidavits. Your father kept this hidden to protect us. He planned to go public when the timing was safe. Eva scanned the papers, her confidence faltering. Declan said Dad was misled that Sierra Hydro fixed those permits years ago. He lied, I said quietly. And he's trying to use you now. Silence stretched between us. Outside, wind swept across the field, rattling the old windmill. Celia appeared at the doorway, hat in hand, her face drawn. Mariel, she said, I just heard from a friend at the county office. Sierra Hydro's attorneys filed for emergency control over the property. They claim ownership through corporate merger. Eva turned toward me, eyes wide. Mom, what did you do? Nothing, I said. Your father did. That night, I sat alone in Ronan's study. His computer was old, the screen dim, but when I searched his drafts folder, I found a message addressed to her unsent. Ava, someday this will test you. Don't trust what shines if it dims the earth beneath it. The cost of clean is never clean when it steals from the living. I read it twice, then left the monitor glowing softly in the dark, its light flickering against the walls like a heartbeat, trying not to fade. The hearing was held in a modest room at the Santa Fe County Administration Building, its walls lined with maps of watersheds and agricultural districts. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly, farmers, engineers, and reporters with recorders poised. I sat in the front with a stack of Ronan's files on my lap, the brass key resting in my coat pocket like a small pulse. Declan arrived in a gray suit, flanked by 2 attorneys from Sierra Hydro. His confidence filled the room before he spoke. When he saw me, his smile barely touched his eyes. I didn't expect you to come this far, he murmured as he passed. It's still not too late to settle quietly. I said nothing. Celia sat beside me, hat in her hands, her weathered fingers trembling. Eva stood near the back, avoiding my gaze, her face pale but resolute. The commission chair called the meeting to order. Declan's attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. presenting the project as a sustainable regional partnership with positive economic implications. They painted Ronan's work as outdated, misinterpreted, a legacy of misunderstanding. When my turn came, I rose slowly, unfolded the letter Ronan had left, and placed it on the table beside the evidence. My husband was an engineer, I began, but he was also a man who believed in balance. Before his death, he documented unauthorized diversions from the Arroyo Sombra aquifer diversions conducted under falsified permits. I handed the commissioners copies of the Ellery Hydrology Survey, notarized and digitally time-stamped, then played the video message Ronan had recorded in the barn. His voice filled the room steady, unmistakable, alive for one final act. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then the water's already been taken. I only ask that you stop it before it's gone for good." The silence that followed was deep and strange, the kind that changes temperature. Declan shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. Sierra Hydro's lead attorney tried to object, but the commissioners motioned for quiet. Then Celia stood. Her testimony was simple: how she'd seen Declan's contractors falsify signatures, how Ronan had begged her to stay silent until it could be proven. Her voice wavered, but never broke. When Ava finally spoke, it was like a bridge mending itself plank by plank. "My father's integrity was his last language," she said softly. "He wasn't fighting progress. He was defending what progress forgot." By the time the commission announced its decision to suspend the project and open a formal investigation, the air in the room felt lighter, almost brittle. Declan gathered his papers without looking at me and left through the side door, his footsteps echoing like cracks in ice. Outside, the late afternoon sun burned clear and thin. I stood on the courthouse steps, feeling both emptied and anchored, as if Ronan's voice had finally reached the surface. Spring returned to Santa Fe with the smell of wet earth and blooming chamisa. The desert, once brittle and starved, carried a faint shimmer of green after the winter rains. At the edge of Arroyo Sombra, the ranch had taken on a quieter rhythm, no longer secret, no longer haunted. Eva and I stood by the newly painted gate as volunteers unloaded wooden signs bearing the name we had chosen together, the Ronan Vaughn Conservation Trust. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "He'd have liked that it's practical," she said. "Not a monument, just work being done." Celia Hart, still tireless despite her years, coordinated the restoration team with the precision of a woman who had spent her life listening to the land. She oversaw the drilling of 2 native wells, redirecting water back toward the small farms that had once depended on it. The old barn, once filled with silence and secrets, now rang with the sound of young voices, students from the university's hydrology department, studying the systems Ronan had designed but never published. Inside, the drafting tables remained, cleaned and reorganized. On one wall hung a framed photograph of Ronan, standing beside an irrigation model, his face half-shadowed but content. I sometimes caught myself talking to him while sorting through his papers, a habit I no longer tried to break. Ava worked closely with Celia, her early doubts tempered into purpose. She kept a weathered field journal and spoke of expanding the Trust's mission to include desert education and sustainable water ethics. Watching her trace the same maps her father once did, I felt the quiet completion of something that had once only been grief. That evening, after the last truck left, I walked into the house and paused by the door. The brass key, the one that had opened everything, hung on a small wooden plaque I'd carved myself. I had it engraved with 4 words Ronan never said, but always lived by consent only. The metal caught the last of the sunlight, warm against the wall, for the first time in years. The air in the house felt full, not with memory or loss, but with balance, like the steady hum of water finally finding its rightful path home.